Expanding hearts and minds on stage and off is the mission of the Alliance Theater in Atlanta. And Susan Booth's mission, as artistic director since 2001, has been to curate experiences where strangers can gather in real time, contemplate life from different perspectives, and learn how to hold multiple points of view simultaneously. The 50-year-old theater was in the final stages of a $32 million renovation when Susan granted us a behind-the-scenes look at the life of an artist and the foundational piece of wisdom that informs her work as a storyteller. I'm Gail O'Neill. Join me and my producer, Felipe Barral, as Susan Booth takes us backstage on this episode of Collective Knowledge, because spreading knowledge is the most altruistic thing we can do as human beings. Tell me the Oliver Wendell Holmes quote that your dad used to say to you as a little girl.
The human mind, once expanded by a new idea, cannot retract to its original size.
When I read that, Susan, I thought this encapsulates her mission as artistic director at the Alliance Theater. You're always talking about making connection through theater and building empathy through theater.
Right.
So when your dad was saying that to you when you were a child, did either of you anticipate that that might be the organizing principle around which your life as an artist would revolve?
Right. My father was my North Star. I have described him to people as my own personal Atticus Finch, because there was a lived moral compass. But my father didn't teach his morality. He practiced it, and he expected it of the people in his home, in his workplace, in his society. And when we lost him, my siblings and I gathered, and we were comparing stories, like you do. And we all had the same sense of ethos and code and thou shalt and thou shalt not. And then we tried to track when Dad taught us that, and nobody could. He just lived it. And we watched it in action and so admired it. And were frankly so daunted by it and catalyzed by it that it became part, in 4 different ways, but it became part of the way all of us live in the world. And so for me, I don't know how else to run a theater or be in a marriage or be a director, except to say, how can we make ourselves bigger by dint of this relationship, this moment, this conversation? I just don't know how else to do it.
I can't think of a more beautiful tribute to an elder's legacy, whether a parent, a teacher, or a mentor, to say, you didn't tell me what to do, you demonstrated it. So what's your earliest memory of having your mind stretched? Where it couldn't snap back?
Oh, what a great question. I think it was travel. When I was 5 or 6 years old, we went on a family vacation to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And we rode up into the Grand Tetons. And I remember a moment where we came over a crest, and I don't know that I had the words for this at the time, but I had a sense of how impossibly small we were against this landscape. And I think about that moment a lot. And I think about now that small is both a scale idea, but it's also a durational idea. We're here for a minute in the larger scheme of things. So get busy, make a difference, because it happens so fast.
When I think of you, Susan, the most outstanding characteristic that pops to mind first is how you always think before you speak. I don't care if you're ordering a coffee, if you're having a conversation, if you're raising funds,
right.
I just see the wheels turning. And I wonder, is that nature or nurture? Is that something else your dad demonstrated, or your mother? Where did that come from? You realize that's a rare trait these days, right?
I think it is a product of having for too long spoken too fast before I listened to the context and knew the listener. We spend so little time thinking about emotional fluency. And we live now in a time of volume instead of value in rhetoric. And I was a free participant in that competitive conversation when I was coming up. I wanted my voice to be heard. And I think now, to what end? And just because you can say something that maybe sounds ornate and lovely, is it the right thing? Is it the right time?
Right. I heard you say something 2 years ago that made me say, one day, somehow, I need to sit down with Susan in conversation. You said one of the best pieces of advice you received in life, and it may have been from this mentor, was ambition without curiosity is just noise. That is so brilliant. Who taught you that, and did it resonate right away?
There is learning a lesson because you failed at it. There is the need to be reflective and vulnerable with the fact that you're at the bottom of a steep hill.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is the capacity to witness in others what the positive model looks like. All of those things contributed to that awareness. My own noise, which had to be pointed out to me, and then the ongoing realization of what it looked like when people said, I see a challenge here, and here's 3 ways we might address it. I see an opportunity here. How could we all benefit from taking that opportunity?
Mm-hmm.
You know what selflessness looks like. I spent time with Ann Kramer last night. Ann Kramer is a daily object lesson for me, because Ann Kramer is 110% present in every conversation, in every organization, countless ones whom she serves. And every time I'm with her, I think, pay attention, this is a lesson.
I'm thinking about your Grandma Rose, who you describe as somebody who was completely present when you were a little girl.
Yep.
The last of 4 children.
Yes.
So you had a voice, but maybe it wasn't always heard or
Right.
drowned out by the older voices.
Right.
Tell me about Grandma Rose.
Grandma Rose was born in Athens, Tennessee. She had this deep, robust laugh that you never went more than about 20 minutes without hearing. She lived joyfully. She met every person with a kind of leaning forward curiosity. And the great gift that I got from her was her singular attention. When 4 kids are born in 5 years, it's a crowded house. And while I didn't know it at the time, what I really craved was one-on-one time with a grown-up. And my grandmother gave it to me from earliest memory until I was out of college. She lived until she was 93. She did water aerobics up until she was 93. And there was a constant learning from one another. She was the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Davy Crockett.
Wow.
And once I learned that, I thought, well, of course.
She was a pioneer woman.
She was a pioneer woman. My favorite Grandma Rose story, I was going to school in Chicago. She came out to visit. And we went to a shopping mall, and we went to a Neiman Marcus. And my grandmother, who grew up with nothing, had married a surgeon and did well in her later life. We went to the St. John's section of Neiman Marcus, where you don't try on clothes, you sit in chairs, and women walk by wearing clothes.
Oh, really? Okay.
And you say, I'll take that, and I'll take that. I'd never witnessed this. And my grandmother bought 2 suits, and I was standing with her as they rang them up, and it was a ridiculous amount of money. We get in my car, and we're driving back to my tiny little studio apartment in Evanston, and we go through a gate on the highway where there is a 40-cent toll. And I reach into the coin basket in my car, and I pick up 2 quarters, and I start to toss it. And my grandmother Rose reaches across and grabs my hand and said, "You are going to throw away a dime?"
The woman who just bought the 2 St. John suits without batting an eye.
Yes.
So she was practical to the core.
Practical to the core, a child of the Depression, and what she had, every item, every person in her life, she valued so deeply. Nothing was taken for granted. Nothing was taken lightly. She's a glorious being.
Who gave you permission to be an artist?
You know, it's funny. I do not come from artists.
Tell me who you come from, and
I
then tell me
come from
your path.
bankers and lawyers and investment people. And the only artist in the family, and I suppose this is where the permission came from, I had a great uncle, Cameron Booth, on my father's side, who, with Romare Bearden, did the European WPA salons.
Oh my gosh.
Where he was a cultural ambassador. And when Uncle Cam came to the house, it was like visiting royalty, right? It was a big deal to have this amazing being in our home. I also grew up with his artwork all over the walls. But the notion that you could be a practitioner of the arts and be a dignified, respected person was a foregone conclusion. And I have to applaud my parents. There was never a moment where they said, because I was going to be an actress, I mean, of all things, right? There was never a moment where they said, you should do something more sensible. Mm-hmm. You should do something more practical.
Right.
They never said that. They expected I would excel at whatever I did. That was the arrangement in our family. Whatever it is, you must do it well.
So what was your sense of responsibility as either an actress or a director to the craft? Not, you just don't want to be in the footlights. That might have been a part of it, but now you have to give something back. What did Uncle Cam teach you that was your responsibility to give back, to not just make noise?
Right, right. When Uncle Cam would visit, he would tell us stories about places where he had worked, other artists with whom he had studied, but it was never simply about the practical application of his craft. It was about the socio-cultural moment. It was about what he was trying to convey. And so this was not an ornamental language. This was a catalytic means of expression. And it was part of a dialogue that was much larger than the creation of a work of art. Art was utilitarian. You could dig a hole with it, you could build a wall with it. It was a socially impactful practice.
That is such a powerful lesson for a young person. And that, I'm guessing, makes you kind of an outlier in American culture where we see art as a luxury, not a necessity.
Right.
It's something that the privileged few can indulge in, and there's, as you use the word squishy to describe it.
Yeah.
So how do you convey the message that there are practical applications for art, civically, culturally, intellectually, spiritually, that we all have something to gain from the arts, from sitting in a theater and listening to someone else's story?
I think, much as it churns me on a daily basis, I think our present American moment is making the most profound argument for the necessity, the essential necessity of this art form that I have ever witnessed. We had a year-long study on the effects of arts-based field trips with grade school and middle school children, and the early results have just been coming in this past week. And one of the headline findings is that the kids in the control group who had multiple cultural field trips had a far greater, and this is a measurable quantitative statistic, had a far greater capacity to hold multiple points of view simultaneously. Think about that, and think about our American moment.
We lack that now. You're wearing the white hat or the black hat, and there is no shade of gray.
And because we lack that, we are losing our moral compass. We are losing any capacity for compassionate connection. We are losing a sense that it is, in fact, your human responsibility to look left and right and think about, worry about, and lift the people with whom you share space. And it would turn out that this art form actually, from early age, without that being the prescribed agenda, the participation in the art form builds that muscle. We've never needed that more.
So we live in a culture where technology allows me to self-select, basically. I can be as selfish as I want.
Yep.
I can cut off friends who don't think like me. I can curate a news feed that affirms everything I already believe.
Right.
Does that make your job more difficult to get people into the theater? Or is there some subconscious survival instinct, let's say, that would drive me to the theater just so I can avoid the sameness that I have cultivated in my everyday life?
Right.
And by me, I mean other people, of course,
Yes.
not me. No, I'm kidding.
Not us. Not us.
No, and not Felipe.
The top-note intellectual answer is, yes, it's more difficult because we are curatorial beings now with information and even ridiculously with our definition of what truth is,
Yes,
right?
that's right.
We can curate that answer. So intellectually, yes, it is more difficult. I still go back to the primal need, which is connective. We still are inherently in our DNA communal beings. And so we crave connection. And there is a gesture that we do a lot at the Alliance when we're talking about, is that an Alliance play or not? And it's this. And all this means is, what is the originating point of this narrative? If it's here, it's going to be harder to make that narrative be a unifying force, because as soon as the gray matter kicks in, we say, I don't agree, therefore I don't like. But if the originating point is here, then we sense this is love, this is terror, this is pity, this is shame, this is joy. I know that. The heart has the same rules of engagement. Once expanded, it does not retract to its original size. And so I believe if art first, and I think it's a strong and mighty tool, so I'll say if it attacks us first, here, it enlarges us, and then by the time it travels north, we're willing to have the conversation. We're capable of having the conversation. But to your question, is it harder now? It's a different engagement strategy. It is saying to folks, not just you might like, but you might benefit. One wants to be careful about saying you might need.
Yes.
Right?
It can be a little patronizing.
Oh, and there's arrogance there, right? And I think one of the challenges that all art forms have is a holier than thou. We speak a special language, and if you're lucky, you can walk in and get initiated, right? When in fact, the ancient Greeks dreamed up this form so that the whole polis, the whole community, could gather in real-time conversation about what is it to be human. There wasn't a course you had to take or a test you had to pass. It was meant for everybody. And I love the fact that when this started out, it was 3 plays 3 serious plays, and a Seder play. There was always a little comedy thrown into the day at the theater, right? So from the beginning was the acknowledgement we would benefit from examining humanity together. But please, can we laugh as part of that?
Yes?
From the beginning, that was part of the deal.
I have seen you in all kinds of cultures, having to appeal to donors, having to welcome an audience to the theater for a night, having to cast and direct actors.
Right.
And you're a master cultural code switcher. You're always, Susan, you're always quick to laugh, you're always listening, you're always attentive, but you can address these different cultures, you can meet them where they are. How did you learn that? And do you feel like you're doing it? Like, do you feel yourself putting on your patron hat, your money hat, your theater hat, your squishy hat?
Love the image of the squishy hat. I don't know that it's a conscious and intentional moment. I think when you start directing, you realize quickly that no matter how good you might think your ideas are, if you don't speak a common emotional language with your actors, with your playwright, with your designers, then you're going to have babble, right? And so the process, the project is, let's craft, do you know Audrey and Rich's Dream of a Common Language?
No, I don't.
It's one of the most exquisite books. And
say the title again?
Dream of a Common Language. I think every artistic process is a scratching away at a dream of a common language. We're going to take a text. That's a fixed idea, right? But now I want to know how you meet it. And I don't want to just listen to what you say. I want to pay attention to how you say. I want to figure out what your why is and how that brings you into that text. I have my own rules of attraction to that text and means of expressing them. But if I just assume, come over here and speak my language, then we might make something, but it's not going to be porous enough for everyone else to be able to find a way in. We have so many languages that we speak, right? People say, well, what languages do you speak? And we list our normative languages, right? But we speak physical languages, the hesitancy with which we say a thing, you and I just saw the same piece of theater and now we walk out to the lobby and we found something very different in it, has to do with our cognitive languages and our emotional languages. And the beauty of a rehearsal hall, if you avail yourself of it, is figuring out how not to say, this is the language we're going to use for 4 weeks, but to say, what's the gumbo? How do you walk in? To listen and to become as fluent as you can with as many of those disparate languages.
Looking back at your childhood, Susan, what was it about your personality or about the input that allowed you to get this so right as a director? I don't think that can be taught.
It's funny, my mother, brilliant, deeply curious human, married and had 4 kids right away, and while she volunteered actively, did not work professionally another day. And yet, it was a foregone conclusion that I would not just have a job, but have a profession. Here we are in Canton, Ohio, and it was a foregone conclusion that I would travel. Somehow, and again, it's like these lessons from my father that were lived more than they were taught. It was a foregone conclusion that your life is bigger than where you are right now.
Wow.
And I suppose it was all the books. When my husband and I were first house hunting, we would walk out of a place and we'd try to figure out what was it that didn't work about that, and invariably there weren't bookcases.
Oh.
And so it didn't feel like home.
Yes.
Right? Because both of us grew up with just to the brim bookcases with well-read. This wasn't bought by the foot for the color. These were well-read, annotated. I remember the first time I took a D.H. Lawrence book out of a bookcase in our den when I was growing up, and there were all my mother's notes.
Wow.
In the margins. And it was one of the sexy ones, too. It's like, wow, Mom.
Kids
right?
have a way of finding the sexy passages, don't they?
Yeah, they do. But I think, what does that tell you if your household is full of used up books? It tells you your experience is a small part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Go back in time, go left and right, go to the experience of that other culture, that other gender, that other belief system. Because that was the other thing. It was not walls of books about Midwestern Presbyterians.
Okay.
Right?
It was a trip. You were exploring.
Yes.
You know, that's the second time you've brought up the word small in conversation.
Yeah.
And in both cases, I feel the expansiveness that you gained from understanding your smallness in the scheme of things.
Yeah. Yeah. We as a family, we use our passports as often as we can. And I realize how deeply lucky we are to be able to do that. But I want my kid to never assume that 30309 is life.
Right.
It's that moment in the Grand Tetons, right? You're a tiny dot of it. And how great is that? Because there's so much room to move. Mm-hmm. And there's so many lives other than your own to explore.
Why does beauty matter?
I love that. Why does beauty matter? Because in the moment we encounter it, words fall away, biases fall away, the body falls away. We are just, we are such gorgeous, full, throbbing souls, each and every one of us, with so much armor.
Yeah.
So many defenses, so many, it should be, well, it can't be. And beauty just cracks all that open. And you're just messily, wonderfully human in the face of it. And it could be an exquisite, Vivaldi does it to me. There's certain colors of blue. There is the green of leaves on my balcony. There is the way my daughter smiles. And all of the talk, all of the received wisdom goes away.
I see an emotional shadow going across your eyes. That's your word, the emotional shadow. That's beautiful. Do you get choked up when you think about your daughter's smile, the green of the leaves, what is the certain shade of blue? Because your eyes are blue, your jeans are blue, your top is blue.
My kid and I love when I hear this reflected back now as something she pursues. There is a quality of light at the end of a day that holds that which was and the beginning of that which will be.
Yes.
And
is this how Moira speaks?
She says, look at that sky.
So she's paying attention.
And I can tease out and put some words on it now because I'm thinking about it. But you see it, you feel it, right? And I love the reset of that. And the invitation to be here now.
So if you could pass on 3 tips for our beloved viewers,
right,
to reset themselves on a daily, hourly, or yearly basis as necessary, so that when the mind is stretched by a new experience, it can never go back to its old dimensions. What would those 3 tiny things be that we could do?
I'd start with be here now, be present. Have a why. Know what it is. And always be a student.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Final question. What is it about your personality, you think, that makes you so good at directing it, pulling things out of people? Total strangers if need be.
I am always wanting to figure more out about this practice of being human that we all get to do. And the only way I can study it is figuring out, why did you ask me that question?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's, what a cool gift to get to spend your days in study of human beings and maybe learn something.
That's how I feel, sitting here talking to you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. It's been therapy. This is great.
Coming up next on Collective Knowledge, Keith Robinson, event designer.
There's so many people that get so wrapped up in the minutia of the details and, you know, the fuss of it all, that they lose sight of what really is the most important, and that is the experience, the takeaway experience, and whether that is the visual part of that experience, or it is the culinary part of that experience, or what the palate has experienced, etc. And I think that when I'm preparing food, it's about heart and soul going into that food. That's right. And I hope that that's what people take away.
Don't forget to share this episode, like us, or send us a comment. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and please subscribe to our channel on YouTube.